This program has been approved for one IDCEC CEU. To receive credit for this program, please submit your full name, IDCEC number, program class code, and your summary essay to ceu@iida.org. The program class code is located alongside the title of this program on the IIDA Academy page. For a certificate of completion to use toward another certifying body, please submit the same information to ceu@iida.org. Thank you.
Well, hello, I'm George Bandy, Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer of Andersen Corporation, Andersen Windows and Doors. Super excited. I've had an extended career in the built environment, also in big tech and fashion as it relates to sustainability. I am so humbled and grateful to be hosting and sharing with you today with these experts who are going to talk to us a little bit about the intersection of design with community, diversity, and sustainability. And I'll get started with having them introduce themselves. And based on my screen, I'm going to say, Annamaria, if you'd start us off, and then Lee, and then Maya, if you give a brief introduction of yourself, and then we'll start the conversation, if that's okay.
Perfect. Hi, I'm Annamaria Leone, and I'm co-founder of the Permaculture Chicago Teaching Institute. I'm also co-owner of Homan Grown L3C. That's a perennial plant nursery, and we also teach biophilia and permaculture.
Thank you.
I'm Lee Bay, architecture critic for the Chicago Sun-Times, and much of my work deals with the intersection between design, architecture, preservation, and race.
Thank you, Lee.
I'm Maya Bird Murphy. I'm the founder and executive director of Mobile Makers. I have an architecture background, but then started Mobile Makers, which is a nonprofit organization that does design programming for youth.
Thank you, Maya. I appreciate it. So I'm going to jump right in. I mean, this is a broad topic. It's been one that's been discussed over a period of time. I'm sure that we've all bounced ideas and heard things, and critics and different designers having conversations by coffee machines. So in this broad representation of this panel, I think that it's perspectives and approaches from each of you that is exciting for me. I'm really interested to understand a little bit more about where you see this kind of Venn diagram of design, the community, sustainability, and equity. Where do you see it right now, and how do you see it beginning to merge to have some impact in our communities? Maya?
Sure, I'll start. Well, I think I'm very excited to start seeing the Venn diagram and all the things that are in the center of all of these different design, community, sustainability, all becoming one conversation, which I think for a very long time it hasn't been. So I'm really, I love that we're finally having mainstream conversations about all of these things coming together and making communities, making them thrive through design, having conversations about making communities better and investing in communities. And I think just thinking through the larger ideas of how to make our world a more equitable and sustainable place.
Thank you. Lee, and in your time in covering this in Chicago, have there been some things that you've seen merge together, or things that you've seen disconnected that are starting to connect, or how are you viewing it from your perspective?
Well, a few ways. I mean, it used to be, 60s and 70s, especially, that cities and architects would come to a community and say, this is what we're going to do. And that was kind of like the way it was. I think coming out of the 70s, probably beginning with some of the activism of the 60s into the 70s, and certainly into the 80s here in Chicago when we had Harold Washington as mayor and other things, that the community understands that it has a sense of that it needs a place, it has its place in what gets built. You take that with the idea of, you know, how streets are flooding and where we don't have trees and all these kind of things, and you begin to have now this kind of interesting intersection of race and culture, you know, and addressing and making sure the design doesn't run afoul of those things. But also in many of those same communities, there are issues of the environment that have to be, right now, I'm in my car, as you can tell, because I had to escape work at my house. I'm actually by a former brownfield in Pullman, in the Pullman neighborhood, in the far south side where there's steel mills used to be. Now there's Method Soap and there's Amazon, and there's a little bit of everything. So all of these things are beginning to come together. We have to, long story short, we have to build better because people are demanding it, but also because the times demand it as well.
Thank you. Annamaria, could you give us some insight from the permaculture perspective, please?
Yeah, so for people who don't know what permaculture is, it means permanent culture, permanent agriculture. And if we look at all of the major civilizations that are still intact, you know, that what we all needed was clean air, clean water, places to gather, good shelter, and places to have clean soil to grow our food. So I think in a lot of the disinvested communities, I'm on the west side, which is North Lawndale, and it is considered disinvested. We're very lucky because we are actually, I believe, on the forefront of taking design and telling the architects what we need, you know, telling Department of Planning and Development, working with them, streets and sanitation, Green Corps, so these core city departments, and letting them know what we need. You know, even the Chicago Department of Public Health, they've come to us because we're so forward thinking in how we collaborate as 501c3s, as not-for-profits. And we also have a very long history of community gardening. So we have over 40 community gardens in North Lawndale. So I think it's a long time coming. I love that design is coming. Oftentimes when we talk about built environment in North Lawndale, in the community garden sense, a lot of it was guerrilla gardened. You know, so now to have a landscape architect come and to have architects come and help us with our built environment, that design element just elevates the community aspect of what we're doing.
I'm going to go back to something you talked a little bit about, Lee, when I go into this next question. You gave a little bit of a history lesson in your early dialogue. But where have you seen design used to divide our communities? And then I'm going to reverse the question and ask, where have you seen it connect our communities?
Whereas divided communities, and you see it here in Chicago, but you also see in other major areas, expressways, usually built over Black neighborhoods, often either to remove the neighborhood, or if it can do both, to remove a Black neighborhood and create a divide between the remnant of that neighborhood, of that Black neighborhood, and perhaps the neighboring white neighborhood. I mean, that's one. Public housing, particularly when we had large-scale public housing in Chicago, clearly designed to stack people in their neighborhoods to prevent them from being able to move elsewhere, and presumably into white neighborhoods. So that's where it's split. Where it's beginning to get people together again, I think, is places downtown, for instance, downtown Chicago, like Millennium Park, where Millennium Park belongs to everybody, and you can see people of all groups, ethnic backgrounds, colors, sexual orientation, everything down there. So public spaces are beginning to kind of step up now and be designed in a way to bring communities together. Certainly our magnificent lakefront, not far from where I am now, is a place called Big Marsh, which is where it used to be a place where steel mills dumped their slag from the steel making process. Now that land has been reclaimed and there's a nature center there, and it's beautiful. And you see people, I go over there because I live not far, but you go over there and you can meet people from, I've met people from the North Shore, the predominantly white North Shore there. So these public spaces are beginning to do these kind of gardens, like what Annamaria was talking about on the west side. I mean, they're particularly one garden, the Sears Garden, really doing a great thing about getting people together of all types and stripes.
Thank you. Maya, to kind of piggyback on that, where have you seen efforts to use design to foster equity and access in healthy environments, or to not foster equity and access to healthy environments in our communities?
Yeah, well, I do think that, we have many, many examples of design not really touching areas. And so a lot of our communities in Chicago have looked almost the same for more than 50 years. And so I think that the first really exciting thing that I saw that was city-led was the Invest Southwest initiative, which, it does have its flaws, but at least it brought right to the forefront a conversation about investing in the South and West sides, and specifically doing that through design, architecture, construction. I do want to shout out a really exciting project that's happening right now, actually in North Lawndale. Tomorrow there's a ribbon cutting for the Starling project, which is a commercial building, and the developers, it's called Duo, that's the developer, but they're actually profit sharing with community members. And so there are some really, really amazing projects that are happening throughout Chicago and are really being innovative in the way that they bring everything back to the community, where it's not about, making a profit, it's about really sharing profits and building up community, really community building.
That's great. Thank you. Annamaria.
Yeah, actually, so my company is putting in the landscaping for that, and I'm also one of the investors.
Amazing.
So it is an amazing project. Another project that we're talking about too is it's another cooperative that's happening with the Street Vendors Association. So this cooperative economics is in our community, and we're going to have all we have a lot of public and private and residential cooperatives or collaborations already. So for example, in the School of the Art Institute, they're helping us educate our adults with art. So they have a continuing education art program out of the original Sears Tower. Across from that is the Sears Sunken Garden project that we're bringing in as a community. We've been working on it for 4 years now, doing community engagement with Piet Oudolf. Piet Oudolf is the the designer from the Netherlands, who built and designed the High Line. So he's all excited. He said this is his first community-led project. So he usually is given an assignment, and then he goes in and then he implements his design. But with this project, he is taking our community engagement ideas and incorporating it. The other thing that I see is there is a new generation that's coming up. So Homan Grown and Pastor Shona is my business partner. We are leading the community engagement for the redesign of the Ogden corridor. So part of that is adding bike lanes. It's making Route 66 smaller. And it really causes something in our community. It causes conversation of gentrification. Why are you trying to change the landscape of our community? Why all these gardens? We also had a project, which was a $7.5 million project that came in 2017 for green infrastructure. And the city came in, they put it in, but then the follow-up, the stewardship part of it was not well done. And so for $3 million on 16th Street, well, pretty much the whole project, it was a failure as far as the stewardship part of it. Now there's a renaissance. Now we have to do that. But why did that have to happen? Right? The RFPs and all of those things, those could have been well done to include the community and really engage the community on the economics of caring for these infrastructures that are coming in.
Thank you for that. I think that one of the things that I'm picking up on from this conversation is that, I'm seeing that these older communities that were close to downtown, there was a migration of people going to the suburbs. And now these older communities closer to the action, so to speak, or where the culture lies, people are beginning to migrate back and reorganize these communities to facilitate having neighborhoods that are closer to downtown, less traffic. They don't have to sit in traffic anymore. Maya, do you think that these types of behaviors, not only in Chicago, but in other cities, are going to give us an opportunity to look at providing equity or connectivity, or do you think that the gentrification will provide more of a divide, or is there a combination of both?
I think it's really hard because, of course, we want amazing things in our communities. We want places to go. We want cool bars and restaurants. We want great grocery stores. But of course, that also draws folks that have not historically been in the community. And so there is a really, I feel like a really hard line where you start to cross into gentrification, but of course you want to draw that investment at the same time. And so I do think that community engagement is huge, and being able to talk to communities who are already there and ask them what they want and what they need. Affordable housing is incredibly important so that people are not forced to move just because there's now investment in their community. Just, I think, an authentic effort to keep folks where they already are while bringing in investment at the same time, like doing those two things simultaneously is incredibly important. But I do think it is really hard. But I think that if there is an authentic effort, then at least we're making progress and we're learning and we're moving forward kind of together.
Thank you. Lee, historically in Chicago, I've lived there for a while. There's just been this whole aura of Chinatown and in Greek town. And like, as you see the architecture beginning to change, will we lose some of those particular dynamics within the city? Will we lose some of the historic cultures of those particular communities as things progress? And do you think that there's some equity lost in that as well as we kind of transform communities into different types of venues?
I think the danger is always there. I think Chinatown, as we see it today, I think it's pretty solid. I mean, what Chinatown had lacked was political leadership that looked like them, that was from the Asian community. Now that's changed. So that's a good sign. And Chinatown, very vibrant. It'll be Greek town. We've been sort of losing Greek town for the past 50 years. It get chipped away when they built the expressways, and Greeks began to move out, migrate out to the suburbs. So that's always been a little bit lost. I think that probably doesn't come back the way it was perhaps in the glory days. I think that the other ethnic enclave that I'm a little concerned about might be Bronzeville, or at least the northern end of it. To kind of go piggyback to the question you asked Maya, it's always been, the city has always been either not willing or powerless or something when it comes to this kind of golden circle within 35 miles of the loop, north, west, and south. And typically 35 blocks, north, west, and the south. So, so in the 70s, we saw Lincoln Park switch almost overnight from predominantly Puerto Rican neighborhood to essentially white yuppies. We're beginning, and the Puerto Ricans who were there begin to be displaced. You're sort of seeing that a little bit now in Garfield Park, 35 blocks west of downtown, and certainly the northern end of Bronzeville, 35 blocks south of downtown. You're beginning to see it now. I'm a photographer, and I was out taking photographs a couple of years ago, about 2 years ago, and I was on the corner of 35th and King Drive, which even if you don't know the area, that sounds like a Black neighborhood, 35th and King Drive. It was one Sunday, I was on this big corner, and I was the only Black person there. And I thought, I never thought I'd see the day, right? So as Maya said, and she's so right, unless you begin to bake into these plans affordable housing, jobs, which help to keep people, and a plan to keep people in the community who have been in this community, then you kind of get the effect that you got in Lincoln Park, which is like in the 70s and 60s and 80s, which is like, oh, well, can't afford to live here, you got to go. And that's wrong. and the city can do much, and developers, who often need subsidy to come into these communities, can do a lot more to make sure that kind of thing doesn't happen.
Annamaria.
Wow. I love
She
love
said,
what
wow.
so much, I love what you just said, Maya, about authentic effort.
Yeah.
And I'm only speaking about my experience, right? So when I refer to North Lawndale, that's where I speak from. But we have a North Lawndale Community Coordinating Council who works, we have like 11 committees, and one of them is housing. And on that housing committee, we have the Lawndale Christian Development Corporation, which is kind of heading that. But also inside of that, we have Homan Square Foundation and IFF. They're like CDFIs, right? There has been a real authentic effort to make sure that our current residents have access to affordable housing. We now have Inherent L3C, which is they make prefabricated houses. And Lawndale Christian Development Corporation has 200 houses that have already been sold to residents. What's lacking is political support for turning over vacant lots. Now, that might have changed within the last month, but what I understand was there were lots that were promised and then not given. So there's this push and pull of one end of the mouth says, yes, we're ready, and the other says, no, we're not. And then, Chicago has 10,000 vacant lots.
Mm-hmm.
But what is the real issue, really? That's the part that to me is always vague, because the people's will is there. The businesses that are innovative, their will is there. So it seems to me like there's a political undercurrent that's not there. And maybe that's, led by developers. But it definitely, one thing that I'll say, gentrification, because I'm in landscaping a lot, they always say, oh, you're bringing gardens, you're bringing gentrification, when that's actually not true. I mean, the housing stock, if you look at it, this is man-made. These are held by land, buildings held by people not from our community who've held it just as a tax deduction. I mean, I could tell you 3333 West Arlington, which was the executive housing for Sears, has been bought and sold at least 5 times. And it's still there. It's a huge place. Why don't we make that into like a Chelsea market, like they have in New York, or someplace, like they have in Detroit? Where's the political will for that? And why are we allowed? You and I get fined if we have garbage in the back of our places, or if our windows are coming down. Why isn't that same thing applied for buildings on 16th Street where they have boarded up and it's almost coming down on people that are walking the streets? They're not getting, or is the fine too small that they don't care? They would rather leave the buildings looking like crap. And then we're the ones who suffer in our community. And that blight gets blamed on the community, like we don't care. And that's the part that for me is just unjust.
That was very heartfelt. Thank you for that. And thank you all for that. Maya, I'm gonna come back to one of your sweet spots. You kind of touched a nerve with me, so I'm gonna throw this out there. Can we do a better job? Political leaders like aldermans, mayors, those folks, IIDA, AIA, big design firms, small design firms that are specifying or being specified in the city, and community leaders sitting down and looking at long-term strategic growth inside of the city from a more comprehensive, authentic place. Is that happening? Could it happen? Should it be happening? And how far are we away from really making that happen?
Well, I will try to answer that question. That's a big question. I think I'm going to split the answer into 2, which is
Perfect.
like, I think that it's a very different situation for like community leaders and people on the ground versus large companies and, people with like traditional power. So I think this panel's happening at interesting time for me because we, on the community side, we just did a city funded project and it's been incredibly hard and I won't go into it. But it is just so hard to get anything done as a like grassroots organization. We have, you know, good plans, we have ideas, we have, you know, the will, as you said, Annamaria. But it is not easy to get anything done. And it's not easy to get anything done in our communities. And so that's why our communities still look like this. So, you know, I think that a lot of people, there are so many people out there who are trying to do good, who just continue to hit roadblocks over and over and over again. And so I think there are a lot of people out there doing as much as they can on that side. And then on the other side, I think developers, large companies, absolutely more can be done. I hear from architects a lot that like we don't have power. I hear from developers that like, you know, the numbers aren't working, so we can't do it that way. And so I think if there was more authentic effort and just like general care for people's lives and people that in design, in the design field that we are affecting, then more would be done. And so I think that sometimes there's such a huge gap between firm leaders and, you know, the large development companies. There's such a gap between where what their life looks like and how they are living their lives with like someone like a 15-year-old Black kid in North Lawndale. Like there's too much of a gap between that to really understand the decisions that are being made up in that large development firm. They're not able to see how that eventually trickles down and affects this 15-year-old kid. And I think it's hugely problematic and there's so much that could be done, but there's not the incentive to actually do anything different. And so like, why change?
That's great. Lee, just to circle back, I've read a few of your articles and your articles are always demanding of the political leadership to take a stronger role. Some great stuff, by the way. Do you see any progress or has there been any dialogue related to the political haves and have-nots? So based on what I'm hearing from Maya, there's a separation between the people who have the will and desire for the community to be better and those who actually are making the decision around development. Are there people who can bridge that gap? Have there been some conversations around bridging that gap? And do you see any light at the end of the tunnel as it relates to that?
Whether I see light, hard to tell, because we're at an interesting point in the city's history where we've gone through. So I'm 50, I'll be 59 next year. So for 40, make sure I got that right. For at least 32, 35 of my years in this city, there's been a daily in charge, either the old man or the son, who I worked for, dare I say, for 3 or 4 years back in the early 2000s. So so the city has been sort of governed by this kind of potentate method. It now understands post-daily that it can't live that way anymore, right? That exacerbates many of the things, if not all the things, that Maya is talking about. So how do we want to be led next? And so we've burned through 3 mayors since Daley. We're probably going to burn through 3 more as the city kind of figures it out. So there's a lot of, to answer your question earlier, I mean, so there's a lot of discussion about how do we fix this. But the people who have the ability to talk about it in an interesting way, the progressive wing of the city, doesn't really have the power in many cases to implement it. So the mayor is progressive, at least on paper, but he's done some unprogressive things. Like, for instance, he wants to give the Chicago Bears $1.5 billion in infrastructure funds to help them build a stadium on the lake. That's not what Saul Alinsky, would have wanted for Chicago. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's hard to tell where this is going, because it'll take time to sort of figure out who wins and what winning looks like, and all of that. There's still lots to shake out. So the people who are talking about it often don't have the power to change it, and the people who are not talking about it, are kind of pressing on with the status quo. And the strong mayor that we're used to in this city, which could come down, and if he's progressive, say, listen, here's how we're going to do, and here's how we're going to do it. I think it's not quite there yet in terms of power and ability to wield that power in a way that brings about the changes that we're talking about that need to happen. Right. So it's a complicated question. It's a great question.
For sure. Mm-hmm. Sure. Annamaria, how do you see that? You talked a lot about the community wanting better and being blamed for not doing better. And then there's this, separation between, I call it separation between goodwill and political leadership sometimes, even though there's some great political leaders that have goodwill and do great stuff, don't want to do that at all. But how do you see us potentially continuing in the undergirth of the work that needs to be done, still doing the work while the regimes begin to catch up on the great opportunities that are before us?
Well, I've been frustrated many times working with the city, just like you, Maya, and sometimes as a person with boots on the ground, I want to give up, but I find allies on the private sector, particularly people who are business owners and they own their land, or churches that are real churches that want to really be in the community and do the community engagement. So I think that's one way to really get through this until the political will happens, is to find the allies in the private sector, and then work and find the ally in particular departments in the city. That's the only thing that I can see, because if I keep saying the city, the city, the city, it justifies and gives no accountability and responsibility to anybody. So what I have been able to do is I've been able to identify, key people in CDOT, in Chicago Department of Transportation, in Green Corps, in the Chicago Public Department of Health, in the Department of Energy, and then get allies at the level of universities, because universities also have power and they have money. So we have allies in Northwestern, UIC, IIT, School of the Art Institute. And then you got to find the organizations that are in our community that do not want to be siloed, that now understand that working as silos is a thing of the past, and that we really have to be collaborative. Like, we just worked on this $20 million EPA grant as a collaborative. 5 organizations in North Lawndale, with 3 organizations in Grove Greater Englewood, in Englewood, and also 2 organizations in Woodlawn. So, but we found that political ally in Department of Public Health and Department of Energy, with Elevate, which is a public, 501c3. So it's complex.
Yeah.
It's a complex answer to a complex question.
That's for sure. I'm gonna circle back to you, Lee. If you could counsel people in design to do one thing or a couple of things to advance equity and sustainable design, what would it be?
Well, first of all, I guess to understand the importance of it, that we have to look beyond it as just a trend of the moment, because we've seen that before. I mean, I think you and I have enough gray in our beards. Certainly, I do.
Yeah.
Where we remember affirmative action, right? And all the great things that were going to happen after that. I think I mentioned in a discussion, I remember seeing ads in Ebony magazine for from places that would never hire Black folk or brown folk or women even in the 60s and 70s, basically by the mid 70s and 80s, very early 80s, saying, come on, we're ready for you. And then a few years pass, and then they're not ready for us anymore. Go, you know. And so I think, and as a result, we pay the price for that, right? As a society. So I think to understand that it shouldn't be treated as a thing of the moment, that we really got to make this thing work for all of our sakes. I think is the most important thing. Secondly, I think being more politically aware and astute is also very important. You know, to be able to talk to the, you know, we talk about the political landscape, but you have to also be able to know it and speak the language in order to change it. That's huge as well. To tell a politician this is in your best interest is gold to that politician. They see it, you know, often in ways that we see, and when they go bad, you know, perhaps like in the mayor of New York, you know, we see when they really want that question answered in such a bad way, that things go, you know, things go bad. But I think that the ability to tell a politician, this community, this garden, this block being lifted up is in your best interest, goes a long way toward contributing to the matrix, the fabric of things that have to change and be in place in order to bring about the kind of changes that we're talking about.
Yeah. Maya, if you could have one or two things that you could share with people in design, leaders in design, developers, to advance equity, sustainable design, what would that be?
Well, I think the first thing is making community engagement central to the conversation, which, again, Lee, you were talking about kind of buzzwords, and this is now a buzzword, especially after 2020 and the murder of George Floyd. We saw, I say this in like every panel, we saw a bunch of statements come out from firm leaders, specifically in design, about all the things that they were going to do, all the things that they were going to change. And I'm just hoping that all of those statements aren't lost now, and that those ideas of how to make their firms more diverse, more equitable, more inclusive, are still happening. And I do want to also say something to designers who are maybe just working at those firms and don't have as much power. Continue to talk about community engagement, continue to talk about diversity. You have power once you come together and voice your concerns and your values and opinions. So keep doing that, even if it feels like you're just like speaking into the void. And I hope that firm leaders just really make this a priority, to continue making their own firms more equitable, more diverse. And then that is then, you know, creating a ripple effect out into the projects that are done in each of those firms, especially if you're centering community engagement. You are going out and, you know, just, I think like this authentic effort keeps coming back, but you're just making an authentic effort to do better for our built environment and for our communities.
Annamaria.
You know, I made a bold step and declared that Chicago is going to be a biophilic city. You know, I think context is everything. Like it really encompasses it, and context is decisive. So if we have the context, so somebody once told me, the context for Chicago is taking money from the public sector to put it into private hands. If this is true, and that's the context of how the political system works, the business system works, the social systems work, then we're in trouble. But if we have a context of biophilia, which is the love of life, and that's a reality where it's a declaration that it's in our DNA, that we have a love for life, a love for nature, then everything that we're talking about is included inside of that. The equity, the diversity, the sustainability, the community, it's design. Nature is elegant. It's a very elegant system that we can just continue to pursue in the fabrics, in the social systems, in our education, in our finances. So I would say, look into the context of how our city works. How are we designing?
I agree. I'm gonna step out of my moderator role and I'm gonna share something that I've viewed over an extended period of time. I think that developers and builders and architects sometimes get it wrong. And when I say they get it wrong, they come in with the intent of building a building as if the building in and of itself is going to change the community. It's going to lift it up. It's going to make it better. And they're not recognizing that the community was already okay without that building being there. And when they come in, the reason why they don't engage or don't connect is because sometimes they come from other places and they have a sense of, I know what's best, or I've seen this successful other places, without coming in understanding the context or the disparaging issues or the great things about a community, and then supporting those things and buying into that in a different way. And I think that's one of the huge challenges. Like, if you're coming in to build a building in a community and you haven't met at least one pastor, one community leader, one elementary school teacher, one person that's delivering mail, one person that is got a store in that community, then you probably haven't done due diligence in your role and your responsibility and the oath that you took as an architect and a designer and a developer to actually deliver what's needed in that community to add value, because you don't know what it requires to add value. You don't know where they are. You don't know what cultures are there. You don't know what permaculture is there. You don't know what diversity is there. You haven't done the due diligence. And I think that we've asked architects to do a lot, and it's gotten away from what their primary job is, which is to come in and develop. You see buildings go up and stay empty a lot of times. The one thing that's consistent is that there's people in them, then there's people out of them. So there's people. You design the building for the people, not actually for the building in and of itself, because it's not effective. It's not being used appropriately. So I'll caveat that into a question, which would be, how do we get better at challenging ourselves to challenge the humanity of architecture and development in a way that we have a significant impact in what we see as a consistent, repetitive issue? I think we've talked a little bit about it, but I think there some things that organizationally we should be looking at, or people we should be having conversations with to have this conversation. I think people want to do this. I don't know anyone who says, I want to build a building to destroy a community. I don't think anyone wants to do that. But I think that we just haven't had those conversations. And I think, Maya, you mentioned it at one moment, and I think Annamaria, you did as well, and Lee, in your own way, around the political understanding. Like, do we hold them accountable for the impact they have on communities that they didn't design right?
It's such a layered question, because that also goes into zoning and ordinances.
Yes, yes.
And that goes into the Department of Planning and Development, and that goes into the economics, Do I think that sometimes there are buildings put into communities to destroy them? I do think that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there is definitely a design to do that. I don't think that's this group. We really want to design something. So it's the context and the space of that. So there's this ability to push and pull on to push and pull on the existing ordinances, and you do have to have community engagement. And sometimes it's not easy. Most of the time it's not, and it takes a long time. Yeah. And there's something called commitment versus attachment. If we're attached to the outcome, we're in trouble. But if we're committed to the community, then there's the possibility of engagement.
Thank you. Lee.
I think that the changing times and the tenor of the times now and in the future it's going to force people to the table, architects, developers to the table, and to tables that they otherwise would not have been wanting to go to. There's this old saying about how if you have to take fate by the hand, otherwise it will drag you by the heels.
Yep.
And I think that that is what's happening. I mean, you know, the old models are falling away. You go out into the community to talk to people about building things. People are extremely sophisticated about what they want, about what they demand, about what they deserve, and that kind of thing. And I think the difference is that the heat of the times, the tenor of the times, you know, people are gonna, you know, they're going to strike back against things they don't like, proposals they don't like. They're going to be vocal about it. You know, they're going to march and protest and picket the way people do police shootings. I mean, I think it's that bad that people are. There's such a desire for people to have a sense of place, to have a place that makes sense to them, and that is home, not just the building, but the block, but the neighborhood. And if they don't see it, if they don't get it, they're going to raise some hell. And I think that's probably the thing that has to happen.
All right, Maya, you are the last voice before we get ready to close out. So tell me thoughts about this.
Well, I do think what Lee said is correct. And then also there's also a shift of climate change. And I think that is going to catastrophically change how our industry works. And it's not a thing that's going to happen like in 50 years. Like this is like starting now. And when we have emergencies that have to do with climate change, when we have people moving because, you know, there's flooding in their neighborhood and they can't live there anymore, architects and designers are going to have to figure out how to work with communities to do work that has to do with making sure that everybody has a home and a safe place to be. And so I think that's also going to make a lot of change in how we work completely in our field.
Yeah. I want to thank all three of you. One, for all the great work that you're doing and all the leadership that you're providing in this particular space, which needs it so much. And I wanted to commend you on also your commitment to share your thoughts and your visions related to what we can do and what's our hope and vision and our fate for our future, and for being a part of this session today and sharing your thoughts. And hopefully we're going to have another one to follow up when we see some results in the future for sure. So thank you all for being a part of this, and thank IIDA for allowing us to share this visionary leadership with the community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.